Hello everybody and welcome to session 4 of the module. The topic in this section is international assignments and expatriation. The selection of global assignments, it's a process. It's a process that starts with the creation of a selection team. Once the creation of a selection team has been put in place, then at the same time the managers will define the strategic purpose of the assignment, which includes the assessment of the assignment context and everything, and establishment of selection criteria. As I said, at the same time there's a review pool of the high potential candidates to cover a position for expatriation. A review interested in and willing to list, because as we mentioned before in another lecture, not everybody is ready and not everybody wants to go on assignment. Once this is done, the purpose is to identify the potential candidates. Then comes the selection. By using standardized tests and feedback instruments and the interview of the candidate and the spouse, you can have an idea of the availability or capability of that candidate to take that position as an expatriate. And then make the offer, a transition to training once offer is accepted. What kind of training? Pre-departure training in terms of culture, in terms of language maybe, in terms of technical aspects that the job that has to be done, etc. So this is the process for selection of global assignment. The selection factors predictive of expatriate success are the following. Strategic factors will include broad experience in the firm of the candidate, the exchange of critical information between the foreign operation and a headquarters. That's an important aspect that companies have to consider when sending somebody on assignment, and professional skills, direct knowledge of the job. As we have mentioned before, technical skills are over any other skill when it comes to international assignments. The second most important one would be immediately culture. Then a grasp of the specific problems to be solved. Another important aspect is conflict resolution skills. The ways in which expatriates resolve conflict can have a significant impact on their effectiveness. And very important, leadership skills. Trusting fellow employees and involving them in the decision-making process results in a better overall decisions, greater acceptance of decisions, and increased satisfaction. Then communication skills. Interpersonal communication skills are one of the most important factors in influencing the success of international assignments. This is an obvious statement. Social skills, a person's social orientation or ability to develop significant relationships can also have a positive impact on the adjustment of the expatriation. One more aspect is ethnocentricity. Using our own rules often leads us to misinterpret behavior in other cultures. So it's very important that companies will pay attention to that aspect of ethnocentricity. Ethnocentricity, we are all a little bit ethnocentric in a way, all of us, regardless where culture we come from. But of course, when it comes to going on assignment as an expatriate, it's very important to be able to at least identify those aspects of ethnocentricity and try to avoid any conflict that can be caused by ethnocentricity. And then flexibility. Opportunities to try something new occur frequently in foreign cultures, and individuals who are adventurous enough to try new things are much more likely to adjust effectively than if you're not really open for change. So, readiness for change, refusal for change. And there are many expatriates that they don't have this readiness for change and they still go on assignment, and of course there are important consequences. And the last two factors, we have stability. When individuals enter a new culture, a tremendous amount of stress may accompany the tidal wave of new experiences. Being able to cope effectively can be a significant buffer against these stressful experiences. And last but not least, gender-related factors. Females comprise only a small portion of employees on international assignment. And the reason is why? Because there's still a great number of women who are mothers of children, and of course this makes it complicated when it comes to international assignments, even if it's for 3 months or 6 months or whatever. However, this is rapidly changing, and especially in advanced economies, and there are many cases now in which is the woman that is the one being sent on assignment, and is the husband the one that has to go with her and eventually take care of the children and everything. So gender related factors, it seems to be like females comprise only a small portion still, but this is, as I said, changing very quickly. One of the most important aspects of human resource management when it comes to international assignments is of course intercultural competence. And here is an interesting model of Bolton from 2003, in which he places intercultural competence in the center of the model, related to attitudes, skills, knowledge, awareness, motivation, and everything that has to do with intercultural communication. And there's 4 kind of areas or quadrants here. On the upper left side we have professional competence, which comprises professional knowledge or international work experience, knowledge about the work environment, and so on. Then we have strategic competence, knowledge management, organizational skills, problem solving skills, decision making, synergy thinking. Then we have personal competence that has to do with personal traits or characteristics, like for example motivation, levels of motivation, self-organization, ability to work under pressure, ability to control situations, and self-criticism. And then we have social competence, teamwork capacity, ability to assimilate, ability to take initiative, communication skills, empathy, and tolerance. So this is a very powerful model because it shows 4 aspects of the life of an assignment, which involves the professional competence of the person, the strategic competence, the personal, and the social. All those components being an essential package for a person that is going to go as an expatriate. HRM and leadership. Leadership is a process by which a person influences others to accomplish an objective and directs the organization in a way that makes it more cohesive and coherent. It is the capacity to translate vision into reality. There's a definition of leadership that I like. A leader will be somebody that will take you to a place where you wouldn't go on your own, meaning that you trust that person to take you there. Okay? So true leadership involves a lot of trust. The leadership skills, the knowledge and skills which a leader possesses and utilizes to realize those goals. And leadership traits refers to the attributes of a leader, such as values, beliefs, ethics, character, etc. These 2 things have to be together, and they're actually by definition together. On the one side you have your skills, things that you have learned. On the other side you have your traits, which are things that belong to your personality, the way you are, the way you grew up, the things that you have as a let's say as part of the way you are and your own personality. Going back to the example of perhaps something that is given by nature. Here a classical comparison between management and leadership. Management is about implementing tactical actions, applying rules and policies, problem solving, motivating, encouraging others, checking and managing ethics and morals, recruiting people for jobs, planning, developing people. Good. Well, those are good things. They're good managers, people who can do those things in a very good way. But leadership is a bit more than just management. Leadership is about creating new visions and aims, making new rules and policies, problem anticipation instead of problem solving, inspiring and empowering others, establishing moral and ethical positions, creating new job roles, visualizing instead of planning, and developing the organization rather than just uh, working on the everyday duties with the people. Okay, so there's a big difference. This is a classic table of comparison between management and leadership. I mean, I'm not saying management is bad. Management not evil. Management is not something that we should not aim to. Management is important, and it's very relevant, and it's crucial for organizations. But we're just saying that leadership goes beyond management. Let's say leadership includes management skills, or it should include management skills. So, expatriation and repatriation. There are 6 main roles of an expatriate. First of all, an expatriate can be an agent of direct control. I'll explain those in detail in a moment. Second, the expatriate can be an agent of socialization. It can be a network builder, a transfer of competence and knowledge. It can help the can be a boundary spanner, and it can be used, or it can be considered a language node. So why is the expatriate an agent of direct control? Well, the use of staff transfers can be regarded as a bureaucratic control mechanisms, where the primary role is that of ensuring compliance through the direct supervision. Okay, so they use that expatriate as an agent to execute control. And what about agents of socialization? Well, there is an implicit expectation that expatriates assist in the transfer of shared values and beliefs. By sending a person to a different location, you're not only sending a person, you're sending a part of your organization. You're sending your value system, you're sending your organizational culture, you're sending your practices, you're sending the way you do things. And through that, the socialization process of the expatriate abroad, those things can be transmitted from one location to another. Expatriates as network builders. Well, international assignments are viewed as a way of developing social capital by fostering interpersonal linkages that can be used for informal control and communication process. So yes, it's not only socialization, it is also an agent of building networks that can be, of course, in the future be very beneficial for the organization. I'm talking about any kind of relationships, but not only government, maybe some local associations, some colleges, some important institutions that at the end of the day will provide the organization through this agent with a database of powerful contacts that can be of benefit for the organization. And then the expatriate is a boundary spanner. Well, a boundary spanning refers to activities such as gathering information that bridge internal and external organizational contexts. So, in this slide, we see expatriates as network builders and also as boundary spanners. And then the role 5 and 6. Role number 5, expatriates as language nodes. What is this? Expatriates who act as linguistic intermediaries or interpreters. This role is crucial if two actors do not have the language skills to communicate directly. So if you send somebody abroad for a period of time where they speak out the language, they might benefit from the fact that that person will learn the language eventually and come back to headquarters and then help and serve as a node of language. And then number 6, transfer of competence and knowledge. International assignments do assist in knowledge sharing and competence transfer and encourage adoption of common work practices which may strengthen elements of corporate culture. At this point, it's important to show that there is a difference between traditional and short-term assignments in terms of a purpose, duration, family position, selection, advantages and disadvantages. For example, the purpose on a traditional assignment is, for example, filling positions or skill gaps management development, organizational development, and so on. Whereas a short-term assignment, it's more focused on skills transfer, problem solving, management development, and managerial control. That's, for a short period of time. The duration, a traditional assignment normally will go from 12 to 36 months. So that's something that requires, of course, more planning and more pre-departure organization. Short-term assignments typically up to 6 and 12 months, but of course all this is relative. It depends also on the type of the assignment. Family's position. Well, in a traditional assignment, normally the family joins the assignee abroad, which you know what that implies. That implies a lot more than just sending an expatriate alone. In a short-term assignment, the assignee is unaccompanied by the family, and maybe it's coming back every now and then, and that's usually the way it works. It also depends where this person is sent. And then in terms of selection, formal procedures in a traditional assignment versus mostly informal or little bureaucracy in short assignments. Normally short assignments, the expatriate or the assignee will have more autonomy. So in terms of the advantages of traditional assignments, well, good relationships with colleagues, constant monitoring, and the short-term assignments, flexibility, simplicity, cost effectiveness. Some of the disadvantages at the traditional assignment level, well, dual career considerations. It is a lot more expensive than a short-term assignment, and there is, of course, less flexibility. One of the disadvantages of short-term assignments was taxation issues related to that assignment, side effects like alcoholism or divorce. That's not the case every time, but it happens sometimes that in these periods of time some of these issues may arise. Poor relationships with local colleagues because they don't have enough time or they to build a longer term relationship, and of course what is related to the working permit issues. Sometimes expatriates go to a location for 6 months, and just to get the visa and working permit will take 6 months. So by the end of the assignment, they will just be getting their working permit. This is typical in many nations, by the way. And I'm talking about any kind of nation. Can be a developed economy, can be an emerging market, or a developing economy. So those are the differences between traditional and short-term assignments. Expatriation and job design. I don't know if you remember the movie Ocean's 11, but normally I use some of the scenes of this movie, some of the parts of this movie. I show them in class, and the idea is to look at this movie. If you remember, that was a group of criminals basically that were trying to rob 3 casinos in Las Vegas. Okay, and but of course, as regardless of the purpose of the assignment, let's say, the important thing here is the issues on job design, reward management, assignments analysis. Assignments, and then the analysis scope that we usually do after watching some parts of this video or this movie is we analyze aspects such as trust and reliability, because if you remember the movie, that's very important to have trust and reliability, because every single detail counts. Following the strategy and the blueprints and flexibility of functions, when somebody is not able anymore to do a task, and then so somebody else can cover him or her, and teamwork, recruitment and selection, when they're looking for the right people to do the right job, training, change of goals or different goals of the leader, the reward or different motivations, coordination of tasks, and skipping obstacles. So if you haven't seen that movie, I recommend that you see that, because I'm sure you would see it with the lens of HR. It's very interesting exercise that we normally do, of course, in a face-to-face class by playing some of the scenes of this movie. Okay, so that's usually an activity that we do in class. If you have the chance to have a look at this at some point, you will see that it's extremely related with human resources. So, we're now in the topic of job design. The purpose of job design is to increase worker efficiency and satisfaction and to stimulate motivation by improving the nature of the work itself. Job design refers to the way that a set of tasks or an entire job is organized. Job design helps to determine what tasks are done, how the tasks are done, how many tasks are done, and in what order those tasks are done. But why is job design important? Well, job design gives guidelines for the new positions and for all positions that may need to be redesigned to keep up with changes in the organization and ways of working. Basically, to keep the company alive and to keep the standards up. It defines the role of the employee. So, and that's very important because sometimes, how many companies have employees who don't really know what they should be doing? You know, so this defines the role very clearly. It determines the hiring qualifications for future employees, and by ensuring that staff are performing functions that add value, it can help the company remain competitive. So again, it is a matter of survival of organizations. Job design is an important component of HR. Well, job design involves administrative areas such as job rotation, job enlargement, work breaks, and working hours. We will see those later on, these differences between rotation, enlargement, enrichment of the job, and so on. But before, let's have a look at the objectives of job design. First of all, there's an objective related to quality. Designing jobs which encourage staff to improve the job itself in such a way as to make errors less likely. Yes, by describing the job, you avoid mistakes. In terms of the speed, the ability to respond promptly to assignments, projects, and adversities. The better explained the job, the perhaps more velocity with the performance of a task. So quality, speed, and then flexibility. Job design can affect the ability of the operation to change the nature of its activities. New product or service flexibility, volume flexibility, delivery flexibility are all dependent to some extent on job design. So quality, speed, and flexibility objectives, related objectives to job design. We also have cost objectives. All the elements of job design described before will have an effect on productivity and therefore on the cost of the job. Then health and safety. Whatever a job design achieves, it must not endanger the well-being of the person who does the job or other staff of the operation. And another objective is related to the quality of the working life. The design of any job should take into account its effect on job security, intrinsic interest, variety, opportunities for development, stress level, and so on that the person has or faces when performing the job. So 3 more objectives here of job design are cost objectives, health and safety objectives, and the quality of working life objectives. How can job design help with the organization of work? Well, job design principles address problems such as work overload, work underload, repetitiveness of the job, limited control over work, delays in filling vacant positions, excessive working hours, limited understanding of the whole job process. So, for example, of the first 2 points, work overload, work underload, how do you really know when the person is being loaded or when the person is being underloaded? And you have to find the right position in this line. Okay, so repetitiveness, what kind of a impact and consequences can this have for the organization of the job? So what are the features of good job design? Good job design accommodates employees' mental and physical characteristics by paying attention to, in the case of physical work, muscular energy such as work rest schedules or pace of work, and mental energy such as a boring versus extremely difficult task. Okay, so it's not only intellectual work, it's also physical, and it's also the mental energy that is consumed in a job. So that might be actually one of the most important features of good job design, to find a balance between those aspects. Good job design gives employees a sense of accomplishment. It includes training so employees know what tasks and to do and how, provides good work rest schedules, allows for adjustment period for physical demanding jobs, provides feedback to the employees about their performance, minimizes energy expenditure and force requirements, and of course balances static and dynamic work. So here's an interesting concept here. Job enlargement. What does that mean? Job enlargement changes the jobs to include more and or different tasks. Job enlargement should add interest to the work but may or may not give employees more responsibility. Basically, enlargement is giving the employee more tasks. It doesn't mean more responsibility or more money or more accountability or more knowledge or more expertise. It just means more tasks. And this is not considered overload. Why? Because normally a person that enters a new job will take, let's say, 5 hours to do a job, and after a year, to do the same job instead of 5 hours, the person will do it in 3 hours. So there's 2 hours remaining there. So the idea is to identify those gaps, and when they happen, just give more tasks to the employee so that he is engaged, motivated, and because he's able to do the job in a more efficient way, this will not be considered overload. So this is job enlargement. Job rotation moves employees from one task to another, distributes the group tasks among a number of employees. I'll give you an example. When you work, for example, in a bank at the accounting department, and your job is to check the mistakes that the different branches of the bank did during a day. Okay, so a job rotation will be very helpful in a case when the employee says, okay, listen, I'm doing the accounting here, but there's a lot of mistakes. I need to know why these people are making those mistakes and what's the context. So they rotate jobs. So they move this person from the accounting department to the actual branch to see the everyday operations and see where the mistakes are. By learning that and bringing it back to your position, you are improving the quality and you are increasing the efficiency and productivity of the job. So job rotation is basically moving people around different positions so that everybody knows what the other person does. So when somebody misses, somebody can take over. Okay, some cultures are good at this. I would say the American culture is very good at that because of this service orientation kind of approach, whereas other cultures not necessarily will have this approach. Okay, so if the person responsible for a certain job is not there, then there's nobody else who can do that, and this is because of a lack of rotation of positions. And here we have job enrichment, which is not the same as job enlargement. Let's not confuse those terms. Job enrichment stresses job content and is structured as the critical issues on the job in job design. Allows employees to assume more responsibility and accountability. So this is the difference, because enlargement does not imply more responsibility, but enrichment does. And independence when learning new tasks and or to allow for greater participation and new opportunities. It can be contrasted with job enlargement, as I said, which simply increases the number of tasks without changing the challenge. So, very important here, the difference between enrichment and enlargement. Enrichment involves more responsibility and therefore perhaps an increase in salary and payment, whereas enlargement is just more tasks in the same position that does not necessarily mean more responsibility or a higher position or more money. Well, there's another term here, job in engineering within work design. Work design allows employees to see how the work methods, layout and handling procedures link together, as well as the interaction between people and machines, for example. Well, the so-called autonomous work groups. The autonomous work group uses the principles of both job enlargement and job enrichment. But rather than concentrating on a single job, it covers a project worked on by a group of people. This concept allows the workers to control the project from beginning to end. The motivation effect of this job design approach encompasses and takes advantage of all the effects of job enlargement and enrichment. Autonomous work groups can develop into the groups deciding their own pace and work breaks. They are, of course, highly valuable groups in the organization because they're autonomous and they take responsibility. In the next two slides, we will see the elements of job design. Number one, here's task analysis. It's a very important element. Defines the tasks needed for a job. It gives logical ordering of the tasks and defines the performance requirements needed. Experts can do this usually in organizations with a lot of success, but you really need to know how to do that because this is not an easy thing to do. The tasks, the definition of the task needed for a job, is one of the most challenging aspects of this. Then worker analysis. It determines what skills and capabilities are needed, level of education the job requires, and how much job training is needed in this case. We have then also the environmental analysis, which determines the safety conditions of the employees, how much space is needed for a certain job, the location, plans for the future, for future expansion, and so on. Okay, so tasks, work analysis in terms of the skills and capabilities, and of course the environmental analysis. Those are the elements of job design. We have here then the methods of job design. There are three methods. Observation, identify desired behaviors, observe workers, identify elements. Then you have interviewing and group work, where you basically obtain information, collect data and techniques and employee involvement from interviewing a group of people. So observation, interviewing and group work. And another method of job design would be, for example, a questionnaire, by determining the purpose, the design, pre-test and revise, and the distribution. Those are the elements that this will contain. So we have then observation, interviewing and group work, and the questionnaire as methods of job design. So how to implement job design? Perform a job analysis, define the purpose, gather information, then observation of the tasks, employee questionnaires, interview, or even books or the internet. Determine what information is important, decide how much education, experience and skills are needed, and then do a draft of a job description. So how to implement that? Well, you gotta go through performance of job analysis, some observation will be required, employee questionnaires, interviewing, and of course sources of information that can help for the purpose. In the next slides I will talk about the key factors in job design. First of all, variety. Variety can improve the interest, challenge and commitment to the task. And this is obvious. When you do the same thing for a long time, it's not interesting anymore. So the variety will improve that interest, and the more interest, the more motivation, better performance, the better performance, higher levels of loyalty. Processing different forms would not make the work more meaningful, as there would be no extra challenge. Too much variety, though, can also be frustrating and a source of conflict and dissatisfaction. So, some variety is good, too much variety is not so good. How suitable is the amount of variety in the job? That is the big question here. Another key factor is responsibility for the job. People need to feel responsible for a significant part of the whole work they are doing, either individually or as a part of a team. And I emphasize this because it's really very important that people feel part of decisions. Their work should be clearly identified so they can see that they are personally responsible for the successes and failures that occur as a result of their own actions. The employees should understand the significance of the work and where it fits into the purpose of the organization. Remember that individuals have their own goals, organizations have their own goals, but the idea is that those goals will align along the way. So the question here is, how much responsibility is there in a job? Another key factor, autonomy. This goes hand in hand with responsibility. Autonomy means giving more scope to people to regulate and control their own work without having anybody micromanaging them. The job holder ought to have some areas of decision making that they can call their own within the framework of their job. So the question here is, how much opportunity does the job give for autonomy? One of the most important key factors of job design is, of course, feedback. Everyone needs information of some kind about how they are doing, about what they have achieved. Otherwise, there is no way of getting any real satisfaction from performing effectively. Performance feedback helps the job holder to learn on the job and keep on learning. So what's the question here? The question here is, how much feedback is provided about performance? And again, we go back to the question, too little feedback, too much feedback? What kind of feedback? Is that negative feedback? Is that positive feedback? So something to actually reflect and investigate a little bit more in depth. Participation in decisions. Most people want to take part in decision making about the matters that affect their work. They want to feel part of it. People are also far more likely to act on decisions that they have had a part in making. Being told about matters affecting people and their jobs is clearly better than no communicating at all. The question here is, how much opportunity is provided for participating in decisions? So participation in decisions is a key factor in job design that it should be actually considered very seriously. And last but not least, another key factor in job design is the recognition and support. People need jobs that contribute to self-respect, particularly through acceptance and recognition by fellow workers and supervisors. Jobs ought to permit relationships between individuals and encourage a teamwork feeling. So the question I propose here is, to what extent does the job provide for support and recognition? So here's an interesting part of the lecture, and something I really enjoy talking about, which is cultural aspects of HR management. So HR management across cultures. There are basically 10 dimensions of culture. This is actually the cross-cultural orientations model, which reference you can find at the bottom of the slide. And it's really, really interesting because those are 10 dimensions that have been taken from different authors. For example, Hofstede or Trompenaars or Edward Hall or Nancy Adler and experts of the field who have contributed with certain dimensions, and of course not all of their dimensions are included here, but the most relevant ones. So this is a group of consultants that decided to create, let's say, a new model with only 10 dimensions, but it's very powerful because it helps you really understand even your own culture, where you are actually belonging. So we have the first two dimensions here. We have the environment and time. Okay, so for example, in the environment we have three types of cultures: control-oriented cultures, harmony-oriented cultures, and constraint-oriented cultures. Of course, I will explain all those in detail in the next slides. And then the time dimension, it's about past, present, or future-oriented cultures, right? That is also very identifiable when you meet people from other cultures, so how they regard the past or the present or the future. So this is the first two dimensions. The next dimension is action, which is divided into being cultures versus doing cultures, and one being more related to relationships and the other one being more related to the task. So again, I'll talk about this more in detail and with some examples even. And then we have communication dimension, that you might be more familiar with this. It talks about the high context orientation versus low context type of cultural orientation, and direct versus indirect, and so on. The fifth dimension is space. Cultures can be categorized according to the distinctions they make between public and private. So the two main orientations here that we will talk about are public and private. And then power orientation. Social environments can be categorized by the way they structure power relationships. For example, hierarchical versus egalitarian type of cultures. Okay, and this is all reflected at the working place. So that's why it's very relevant to talk about HRM across cultures through this model. Then we have another dimension, which is individualism, collectivism. That's a classic dimension of Hofstede and Trompenars. They talk about these things, and also I think Nancy Adler talks about it. And it's about the individualism versus collectivism. And then competitiveness. An emphasis on personal achievements, individual assertiveness, and success indicate a competitive orientation versus a cooperative orientation that is more related to people relationships. The ninth dimension, structure, order-oriented cultures versus flexibility-oriented cultures. And then the thinking. How cultures actually conceptualize information, deductive versus inductive, linear approach versus systemic approach. So those are the orientations that we will explore within this dimension. So here's the cross-cultural orientations model and the dimensions. First we said the environment, which is how individuals view and relate to the people, object, and issues in their sphere of influence. Time, how individuals perceive the nature of time and its use, past, present, future, etc. Action, how individuals view actions and interactions. Communication, how individuals express themselves. Direct, indirect, high context, low context. Space, how individuals demarcate their physical and psychological space. Number 6, power, how individuals view differential power relationships. 7, individualism, how individuals define their identity, collectivistic, individualistic. Then we have competitiveness, how individuals are motivated. Structure, how individuals approach change, risk, ambiguity, and uncertainty. And of course the thinking, how individuals conceptualize information. So those are the 10 dimensions. And here I have a diagram with all of them, right, where you can see, again, you can identify the dimension and the orientations that it contains: environment, time, action, communication, space, power, individualism, competitiveness, structure, and thinking. So we're going to go through this in the next slides. So the first dimension here, the environment. The environment has three types of cultural orientations. The first orientation in this dimension is control orientation. So this is typical, you hear this in countries with this orientation, things like go for it, for example. Life is what you make of it. Don't let anything stand on your way. Hard work and perseverance pay off. You got a problem, fix it. God helps those who help themselves, and goals can be achieved if the right things or tools are applied. So what type of cultures would have these kind of expressions? Those would be control oriented. So yeah, some of you thought about the United States. Yeah, normally Anglo-Saxon cultures, like the case of the US or maybe Britain or Australia or Canada, those are phrases that you may hear in this type of culture. Of course, Ireland, it's an Anglo-Saxon, but Ireland has, even though they will go through this orientation, sometimes they have their own influence as well. It's a particular case, by the way, very interesting. So control-oriented. Overall speaking, I think they're also a control-oriented culture. Then we have harmony-oriented cultures. In these cultures you hear things like don't make waves, don't rock the boat, go with the flow, we will need to adjust, it is an integral part of nature, it's harmonious relations with the world. Plans should have flexibility and allow changes. Which cultures are like this? Well, I think of Asian cultures, perhaps India, perhaps China, and some other countries around the area. It's typical in those kind of cultures. It's definitely not what you will hear in the United States of America or in Great Britain, right? It's just about harmony, orientation, and keep it, let's say, low profile. And the third orientation in this dimension is constraint. And in this type of culture you hear things like it's a matter of luck, it's fate, inshallah, you take what life gives you, or if God wishes to be so, the cycles of time, planning at the strategic level, and direct control over business. So this is typical in cultures like, what would you say? I would say Latin American cultures, I would say Arab cultures, I would say Muslim religious oriented cultures, maybe some Asian cultures, but we see very clearly that those, I can see that in my culture that some of these expressions are there all the time. And this is what? This is not necessarily leading economies, right? Or leading technology countries. Those are countries that are usually emerging economies, okay? And they have this constrained orientation because they blame the circumstances or God or whatever. They tend to be very traditional and very religious countries, by the way. So those were the three orientations of the first dimension, which was the environment. Second dimension here is time. Time has different types of orientations to analyze here: single focus cultures, multi-focus cultures, past, present, future oriented cultures, which we will see in detail. So single focus cultures, one task at a time, meeting set deadlines, everything has its time and place, one after another. The focus is on one particular issue or subject, step-by-step performance of tasks. Meetings will tend to be highly focused and a set agenda and a time frame for each item. Which cultures is like this? Germany. Germanic cultures. Austria, Germany, Switzerland, the German-speaking part of Switzerland. Because they're, into meetings, step-by-steps, agendas. This is not the case of a Latin country. This is not the case of Colombia or Venezuela or Bolivia or Mexico. Single focus cultures versus multi-focus cultures, where multiple tasks or relationships occur simultaneously. The ability and flexibility to satisfy multiple demands rely on relationships. The completion of tasks and accomplishment of goals tend to rely on strong relationships rather than on abstract plans. So those cultures are not necessarily cultures that are known for their productivity and efficiency. Those are more into relationships, people, flexibility, etc. So multi-focus cultures. Within this dimension we have past-oriented cultures. Well, those are cultures that tend to meet the change, the unknown, with deep distrust, suspicion, and rejection. Maintaining historical continuity has a high value, predominant in groups whose identity is grounded in either long histories or collectively traumatizing historical events. For example, this is typical in countries that have been colonized for a long time. Ancestor worship and strong family traditions. I would say many countries in Latin America will be past oriented. You know, I know people in some of these countries that still blame the Spanish for what they did 500 years ago. You know, this is a classic example of a culture that lives in the past. Okay. Then we have present oriented cultures. Well, they aim for quick results and stress the here and now. Take care of today and tomorrow will take care of itself. Don't look back. Formulate short-term plans. Divide resources based on present demands and select train employees to meet current goals. What cultures are like this? Again, we go back to the Anglo-Saxon world, right? And perhaps also some Germanic cultures. Present-oriented. Here and now. Do what you have today to do now. Okay? Present-oriented. Future-oriented cultures. Willingness to trade short-term gains for long-term results. Driven and motivated by a general long-term vision. Divide and coordinate work and resources to meet longer-range goals and projections of the future. Recruitment and professional development will be directed at future needs. When I think of future-oriented cultures, I think like Japan, for example. Japan lives in the future. Japan needs to plan for the future. Okay? By the way, this is typical, if you like, or very common, this future orientation in countries that are small in territory, big in population, and short in natural resources. And for obvious reasons, they need to focus on the future. So you have, for example, Japan and Canada when they do business together. Japan is ready to pay for the wood because they buy the wood from Canada at a very good price, but they want to buy a huge amount of wood for the next 50 years. Because Japan is future oriented, but Canada is more present oriented. So Canada would say, no, I'm not going to sell you the wood for the next 50 years, even though it's a very nice contract, because I don't know. I'm present oriented and in the here and now. That would be an example of this. So future oriented cultures, number one example I would think is Japan, and also nations that are small in territory, big in population, and short in natural resources. The third dimension here is action, okay? And it's subdivided in doing versus being type of cultures. Doing type of culture related to achievement. Emphasis is placed on measurable accomplishments, achieving goals and completing tasks. Activity or task focusedness defines value, both social and professional. Motivation is achievement based. Performance is measured against the set standards, and rewards such as bonuses, recognition, promotions, etc. are given on the basis of global achievement. So it's about doing, it's about what you're able to do. It's not, I mean, your name is not important, the type of car that you drive is not important. It's important what you can do and what you can achieve. Alright, so this is classic in cultures like, again, Anglo-Saxon, maybe Germanic cultures, where they're more task-oriented rather than people-oriented. Being cultures is about ascription. They value affiliations, character, and personal qualities. Building affiliation, trust, rapport is key in these type of cultures. Emphasis is placed on quality of life, caring, and relationships. Job satisfaction is valued more highly than task accomplishment. Motivation is based on factors related to quality of organizational life, relationships with superiors, work environment, and challenging, interesting work. So again, this is more the case of my own culture, Mexico, or other cultures in the south of America, or Asian cultures, or even Arab cultures. Okay, so again, in some of these dimensions, you can see that we can basically divide the world into two big portions. Okay, so being versus doing. So fourth dimension is communication. This dimension includes high context, low context, direct, indirect communication, as well as expressive cultures or instrumental cultures. Okay, so the first orientation in this dimension is high context. High context, so the stressful exchange of information hangs on the ability to apply a shared and implicit framework of interpretation to a message. This framework is the product of the shared experience of groups and our societies, which makes certain things understood without their needing to be stated explicitly. So in other words, those are cultures in which the language and the way they talk to each other, the meaning or the intention of what they're saying is not in what they're saying. It's perhaps in the way they are saying it. Okay, in these type of cultures, it's very common to find people saying yes but meaning no. Okay, where that for low context culture is impossible. I mean, you say yes is yes. High context is yeah, say yes, but I actually meant no, because the message is not in the words. The message, it's in the way I deliver the message and all what I say around what I'm saying. So this is high context communication. Low context communication tend to expect, reinforce, and reward making meaning explicit. The focus is on deriving information from words and their literal meaning. Words are the most significant carriers of meaning. Propensity to block out potential interference from nonverbal or other contextual sources. So, in these cultures, if you say, I mean, yes is yes, no is no, and you said it. It's in the word. Okay. These cultures tend to have more vocabulary, by the way, because they're so precise. And those cultures where they are low context, they normally have or are known or reputed for good languages for business and technical stuff. For example, classic low context culture, again, Americans or Anglo-Saxons or Germanic cultures or Scandinavian cultures. Whereas high context cultures, Spanish speaking people, Italian, any Latin language around, and the Asian languages and African languages and the Arab world, actually the majority of the people and the majority of the cultures in this planet are high context. And low context are those that are more into the exact meaning of the word. Again, Anglo-Saxon, Germanic cultures or Scandinavian cultures. Direct communication associated with low context. Direct cultures value open handling and resolution of conflict and tension. Let's deal with this right now. Say what you mean what you say. Give it to me straight. They tend to view conflict, tension, and frank feedback as constructive and important. So direct communicators are normally low context communicators. So therefore we're talking about Americans, Anglo-Saxon world in general, and Germanic cultures. Indirect communication. Well, they value conflict avoidance in communication, are careful not to bring contentious issues out into open or bring tensions into a relationship. Particularly true when the relationship between the individuals involved is not well established or when others might witness the conflict or tension. Indirect communicators are usually high context cultures, but not all the time, okay? There was an interesting discussion with Russians, for example. I don't know if there are Russians in this class, but Russians can be at some point low context and indirect, if you know what I mean, which is kind of a contradiction. It's a paradox, but it's not. It can be the case that some cultures are low context indirect or high context direct, okay? It's not the norm, it's not the usual, but it can be the case of some cultures. Two more orientations of this dimension. We have expressive cultures versus instrumental cultures. Expressive cultures display an accentuation of emotions that are key components. Emotional alignment is a driving element of successful communication and the sensation of having connected. Less concern for factual details and precision, and those who hide their emotions may be perceived as unapproachable, cold, or deceitful. Those are cultures that express their emotions at all times. Very flamboyant, very expressive. They talk loud. When I think of expressive culture, I think of the Spanish, of the Italians, for example. Expressive, they even talk with their hands, like, you know, Argentinians, Italians, Spanish, Latin cultures, okay, very expressive. And some Asian cultures can be also expressive. With, you know, normally we tend to think that they're more instrumental, but no, sometimes they're very expressive as well. And then we have instrumental cultures. Okay, instrumental cultures. Communication is problem-centered, rational, pragmatic, and issue-oriented. They value the reduction of emotion in conversation. Here in communication, they seek cognitive, rational alignment and not emotional alignment. Then we have the fifth dimension here, which is a space. This dimension includes two types of orientation, which is private and public. Public-oriented cultures value open access and accessibility. They seek to close physical proximity, relationship building is important, and information is shared on a good-to-know basis. Whereas private-oriented cultures value the clear demarcation of boundaries and their respectful treatment. They value the maintenance of interpersonal distance from one another, both physically and socially, and information tends to be shared on a need-to-know basis. So, public and private. Then we have power-oriented cultures, or the dimension of power, which is hierarchy-oriented or egalitarian-oriented. Hierarchy-oriented cultures value social stratification and accept different degrees of power, status, and authority. For example, you hear things like know your place, don't go around the boss, respect your betters, are common in such cultural environments. Power and authority are centralized and organizational structure is tightly controlled. So that's hierarchy-oriented cultures within the dimension of power. And the second orientation is egalitarianism or equality, where they value the absence or reduction of hierarchy. Inequality is thought to be an unsatisfactory condition. Attempts to minimize it through institutional means, including legislative and political action, as well as social practices such as the disregard of professional and academic titles or negative regard for status and symbols. So, hierarchical cultures, Asian cultures, Latin cultures, Arab cultures, egalitarian cultures. Scandinavia is number one, like, you know, Sweden, Norway, and Northern European countries like Germany, and Germanic cultures, and of course the Anglo-Saxon. Then we have collectivism. In collectivism we have different types. Individualistic cultures, they tend to focus on the individual person and his or her achievements. High value on independence. It's everyone for themselves. People strive to minimize obligations to others, except for the very close family members. Social bonds between people are relatively loose and flexible. Whereas in collectivistic cultures, expect, reinforce, and reward the subordination of individuals' interests to those of the group. Cohesive groups protect their members in exchange of loyalty and obligation. Personal identity is grounded in the social network to which the individual belongs. Harmony rather than speaking one's mind. And a social control is based upon the fear of losing face on the responsibility of shame, the possibility of shame. So individualistic cultures are related to direct cultures, to low context type of communication cultures, to egalitarian cultures. So think of, again, Anglo-Saxon world in this type of orientation. And we have, for individualistic, and then for collectivistic, we have, well, Asian, Latin cultures, Arab cultures. We also have universalistic cultures. Stress the consistent application of rules, processes, procedures, and laws. They tend toward the manufacture of universal products and services. Product decisions consistently favor items that can be mass-produced in identical batches and sold to a mass audience through the mass marketing, like Coca-Cola or iPhone or any other mass-produced product. So universalistic cultures, again, number one example I would say the United States, because of this approach of producing the same product for everybody in the rest of the world, which is one way to actually show this state of the art and promote one globalized world. We also have then, in contrast with this, the particularistic cultures. They emphasize difference, uniqueness, and exception. They see little value in the one-size-fits-all. They tend to emphasize the exceptions and the specific conditions that impede a universalistic process or approach. They tend to emphasize their own uniqueness and value standing apart from others. So those are the four orientations of the dimension of collectivism. We move on now to competitiveness. And in the dimension of competitiveness, we have competitive cultures and cooperative cultures. Competitive cultures are materialistic and emphasize the value of competition for resources and or status recognition. Great importance to the acquisition of wealth, property, goods, fame, expertise. Ambition, assertiveness, decisiveness, initiative, performance, excellence, speed. The desire to be number one. The ethos is we live to acquire and attain. And this is classic. For example, a competitive culture, you see, it's classic that you go to a company. Every company you go, you always see a picture of the employee of the month. Okay? Can you think of a culture like this? Yes. The American culture is very much like this. It's competitive. It's just be number one. You got to be number one. Number two is not good enough. You got to be number one. If you go to France, to a company, you will never see a picture of the employee of the month. They're completely different in that sense. Okay, it's very remarkable how these cultures vary in those types of orientations. We have then cooperative cultures. Quality of life, values sympathy, relationships, material success is less motivational, higher concern in job satisfaction, work-life balance. Work is structured to facilitate group integration. Personal time and time with family are very valuable. Success is measured in broader terms than monetary ones, and the ethos here is we work to live. So work is a part of your life in cooperative cultures, whereas for competitive cultures, life is work. Okay? The ninth dimension, structure. Well, in this dimension we see two types of orientation, order-oriented cultures versus flexibility-oriented cultures. So, the names are very obvious here. Order-oriented cultures seek to reduce uncertainty, value security, predictability, and clarity. Change perceived as threatening. need for rules, regulations, processes, procedures written and unwritten, stable employment and low job mobility are valued. Deutschland, Germany, order-oriented cultures. And then we have flexibility-oriented cultures, more tolerant for the unknown situations, people and ideas. Deviation from established procedure trends tends to be tolerated, and in fact it is often expected and valued. Conflict and personal risk are considered natural rather than threatening. Value skill and improvising and often rely on it to get things done. I belong to a culture like this, a flexibility orientation. And the last dimension here is the thinking dimension, which includes deductive, inductive, linear or systemic way of thinking. So, deductive oriented cultures, they emphasize abstract thinking and the reality of ideas, moral values, theories, and the principles that can be derived from them. Priority is given to the conceptual world and symbolic thinking rather than to the amassing of facts. For example, generalizations are derived from other concepts by means of logic rather than from facts. Deductive cultures, for example, the French is a typical example of a deductive culture. They come from the theory to the practice. Whereas in inductive oriented cultures, they derive principles and theories from the analysis of data. Models and hypotheses are based on the empirical observation and experimentation, and the goal is verification through empirical proof. The amassing of facts and statistics is valued, and a good deal of faith is placed in methodologies and measurements. They are into measuring people. They love measuring everything. So, the inductive oriented, it's very typical in America. They're inductive. They go from the analysis of data and they build the theories. Perhaps the theories that then the French will use to go back down to the data. And then we have linear oriented cultures. Those are cultures who tend to dissect a problem or an issue into small chunks that can be linked in chains of cause and effect. The emphasis tends to be on detail, precision, and pragmatic results. And we have then the systemic oriented cultures, which stress an integrated approach, sometimes called holistic or synthetic approach. This integrated viewpoint focuses on the relationships and connections between the parts. There is often a reliance on analogy, metaphor, and a simile for explanations. So, deductive, inductive, linear, and systemic thinking. So you may think of your own culture, and then you probably can imagine where your culture belongs. There's an interesting debrief exercise that takes about 45 minutes, which is fascinating, in which we take advantage of the huge diversity of these groups, and we analyze the differences among the represented cultures in the room. But anyway, this is not possible to do that exercise, but you can imagine how interesting that would be to work in small teams and find out your differences. And of course link it to the human resource management, because don't lose the focus that we're talking about HRM and across cultures. So it's important and imperative that any human resource manager will be aware of those dimensions. Strategic analysis of global assignments. Well, we have an interesting diagram here that shows that analyze the current global assignments as well as define the current global candidate pool brings into the establishment of future goal assignments and needs, which ends up with the develop of future global candidate pool for strategic success. That was a model proposed by Stewart and Grinzen, so it's very interesting to say more in detail of this work. The other activity, or the activity that I have related to this lecture, is a case study. So I will ask you again, whenever you have the time, you don't have to do it right now, you can take a small break if you want, but the idea is that you go and download the case of Fred Bailey, An Innocent Abroad. It's a case study in cross-cultural HR management, and it will show many of the aspects that we saw in this lecture. So we're going to change strategy here a little bit. So instead of you coming back and me having a further discussion around this, what I would like you to do is read the case, okay, and send me a small message, an email. I just want to see your name and your reflection on this case. That's all I need. It's just an activity. Just your conclusions about this case. So the questions will be the following: what is the main problem in this case? Okay, main problem. What are the other secondary problems around this? Question number 3: how would you solve this situation as it is now in the case study? And question number 4: how would you prevent this from happening in the future? Okay, so there are 4 questions that I would like you to answer, and just write three few lines in an email. I want to see your name and your reflection on just the questions that I just told you. What's the main problem? What are the secondary problems? How will you solve this situation? And how will you prevent this in the future? So thank you very much. This is the end of the lecture today. So I hope you have enjoyed it, and I will get back to you with more information on these topics. Thank you for attending this session today.